Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second. Wow, we're really on a roll now. The second Mythgard Movie Club, and yeah, we're here. We're talking about the Last Jedi. I don't know what more to say about that other than we've got some announcements here. I think Kat, you were going to go through some of these.
Yep. Just want to let you guys know, I'm sure you know, but reminding you that classes for the spring semester at Signum start on Monday. So if you have not yet registered, please do so ASAP. Just that helps us figure out planning for preceptor groups and numbers and that sort of thing. We have two new classes that are live premier classes, literature, film, and technoculture with Chad Andrews, and Intro to Germanic Philology 2 with Nelson Goering and Paul Peterson. So those are going to be pretty exciting. They're classes that I think certainly the lit film tech one I would be taking if I was still a student. And then flex courses, we've got Beowulf through Tolkien, Chaucer 2, the Potter Saga, and Tolkien's poetry also running. So those are available too. Also coming up this weekend on Saturday is Tex Moot, the first moot happening down in Texas. Corey will be there, and he is traveling there at this very moment, which is why we're taking over the Wednesday time slot for the movie club. So we are grateful to him to get out of the way for that. And then finally, tentatively for January 30th, Tyler Swope will be doing his thesis theater. I don't think an abstract is published yet, so just keep your eyes peeled for that and for confirmation of the day and time. So the first, thesis theater of the semester is coming up, and that's very exciting.
Yeah. So I just noticed we had the next Mythgard Academy 2 is starting up soon. I know he's got one more week of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And then I don't know if we have a start date yet for the War of the Ring, but that'll be coming up. I think there's usually a week or two between those classes. And then we're currently in the registration period for Mythmoot 5. That's 5, people, not V. But that's crazy, actually, now that I think about it, just how many we've had of those already. And so we're in that registration period. I think the registration goes through like May, so you've got a little time, but register sooner. It helps with planning. No, Neil, it's not Mythmoot TV or V or anything like that. It's Mythmoot 5. And announcing brand new, we're the first ones to break it, and Corey will be upset because he didn't get to do it and we stole his time slot. London Moot, which is happening in April 21st. There's a website and everything all up there. You can actually register for it now as of like yesterday. And so you can check out londonmoot.com to see the details there. And I'm sure there will be, I don't think I'm going to make that one. I am going to be at Tex Moot this weekend, but I won't be able to make the London Moot probably. But that said, speaking of Hitchhiker's Guide, we've got next movie club coming up in February, and we're going to be doing that one. And we have actually secured Corey. He's agreed to join us. We kind of browbeat him into it. We're still working out the rest of that panel. There may be a few other members who are here tonight who will join us for that. And that'll be fun. I saw the movie like when it first came out, but I haven't seen it since then. So I'm not sure what we're in for exactly with that one, but it should be good. And then after that, we've got near the end of March, we're going to be doing A Wrinkle in Time, which I've never read the book. I'm planning to read it before I see the movie. And I'm trying to get my daughter to read it with me. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. And we'll be talking about that. I know, I think, Kat, you're looking into that. And we'll have some new panelists joining us for that. Some folks who are really passionate about the book and the story.
Yeah, we have some very devoted Wrinkle in Time fans gonna join the panel, so that should be, given how interesting but also like very different from the book the trailers look, I think hopefully that'll be an interesting discussion. So yeah.
And then we get to reveal now the rest of our year. So we had already announced the new movies in our last movie club that we were going to cover throughout the years. And by new, we just mean released this year. So let's not get into a discussion of new versus old again, as we did on Facebook. But the new movies, that is the movies that are going to be released through the rest of the year, in addition to Wrinkle in Time. Of course, we have to look at the other Star Wars movie coming out this year. Ready Player One, which is actually another book that I've never read and kind of always wanted to. And then sort of following up from our Rogue Beast discussion last year, we had to throw in the next Fantastic Beast film as well at the end of the year. And I'm not going to talk about the movies y'all voted on because you didn't vote for mine. So I'm just going to let Kat do that part.
Curtis's, so you know this whole thing isn't entirely rigged. Curtis's pick did not get voted. So we already established Hitchhiker's Guide as, you know, the first one we're going to do is a follow-up to Mythgard Academy. But we, you know, set up a poll. Hopefully you all chipped in and helped us decide what are the other older movies that we're going to look at throughout the year. I threw in the percentages because I think they're interesting. Everybody could choose up to 4, and we had 6 options. So the winning for our Alien, She, Edward Scissorhands, and Night of the Living Dead. So pretty good mix of random genres and decades that hopefully should be interesting.
And so basically, the way that we worked it out is we'll kind of be alternating these. So we'll do kind of one new one older one. I think that works throughout the full year, although I can't remember if there were any spaces there where we kind of fit some of the older ones, like 2 in between. But we'll get that full schedule out, and so everyone can see, you know, when we're doing those older films as well. The new ones obviously are tied to sort of their release dates. We're aiming for 3 to 4 weeks after the release date for each of those. So yeah, and Arthur, I'm not sure which movie you're talking about, but we do, you know, for some of the ones that maybe have multiple versions of the films, we'll primarily be focused on the ones we had put like the years. Like I know She has had various incarnations. Was there another version of Hitchhiker's Guide too, maybe, that we can look at and you know, maybe talk about including that as part of the discussion as well, for sure.
Oh, he was referring to Wrinkle in Time. Yes,
there okay. Was there
was like a
previous
movie version of it and everything. Yeah.
Cool. So that said, let's get into the discussion. Sorry, I went ahead too far. So I think like we did last time, like let's have this fairly open-ended. We did write down some notes, and I just wanted to start out, I guess, maybe talking about the theme of failure, because I personally thought, I remember thinking the first time, just even while the movie was going on, like, wow, they're talking a lot about failure. Maybe this is important. Maybe this is a theme. You can tell why I became a literature major, because I can pick those big things out like that. But I just threw in some thoughts here of like either things that these characters said, or things that were said about them, or in the case of Finn and Rose, it's just kind of like a lot of things all in a row. But I just kind of want to open it up to the group. Like, I guess one, do you agree? Like, is that like, if there is an overarching theme, is it failure? Is it how we deal with failure and learning from it? Is there something else that you sort of picked out? And maybe we can talk about some of these specific cases, and I'll just throw it to the panel to see who responds first.
I mean, I definitely think failure is a theme. And I think failure with weakness in particularly. If you think about Snoke, what Snoke says to Kylo Ren about manipulating weakness, and which is what he did to Ben. And I think weakness is also what Yoda tells Luke. It's, teach mistakes, teach weakness, teach failure. And so it's not just learning from your failures, like your actions, like what you've done and haven't successfully done, but also your own inner weaknesses, and concentrating and turning them into strengths, and letting them not be manipulated by someone outside of you.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. First, Dominic Nardi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm primarily
you've introduced. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm primarily a political scientist who works in Southeast Asia, but also a big Star Wars fan, as you can see by my little friend here. So, in terms of failure, I actually wrote a bit about this on my shameless plug, my blog Nardi Views recently about with regards to Luke Skywalker, because one of the big controversies of this movie is that Luke fails, and a lot of fans were upset by that. It was somewhat traumatizing to see our childhood hero who saw the light in Darth Vader be tempted to kill his nephew because he saw this darkness in him. So I think it's partly, I think it's a really interesting generational issue actually, in that in most pop culture movies and most science fiction genre films, to the extent a hero fails, it's usually for a very brief moment in time. And it's usually something that's overcome pretty quickly within the course of the film. Superman maybe fails to save somebody, but then resolves it pretty quickly. What I found really interesting about failure in this film, it's failure that affected the character for a long time. And that spoke to me in that's kind of how life is. And that like we can fail and that failure stays with us, and we have to figure out how to resolve that. Failure isn't just like an obstacle that we jump over. And I think that's why Yoda's words spoke to me too, because like you can't run away from failure. You either have to learn from it and accept it, or if you're like Kylo Ren has failed, but he wants to kill the past. He wants to deny that he's failed, and so he remains bitter and angry, and he keeps failing.
So that brings to mind, I don't know if this is attributable or just one of those like proverbs that doesn't have a real source you can trace it back to, but the whole idea of like failure is not falling down, but refusing to get up. And so like by that definition, I guess, like, yeah, if you're able at some point, is there sort of a statute of limitations on failure? Like, is there a point where you just say like I failed and okay, that's it, like that's just the way it goes, or do you always sort of have a chance to come back around? And I guess that maybe Luke as like the longest failure of the film, if we can call him that, like based on the fact that he like goes off and hides for many years and whatever, like does is that a failure, or does like his actions at the end ultimately redeem himself?
Well, you kind of touched on the thing I was thinking about, which is the distinction of what is the failure that we're defining? Is it the momentary temptation? Because kind of what, Dom was saying is, when characters fail, heroes fail in these types of stories, it's a momentary lapse that they recover from. And I feel like in a way, Luke's thing qualifies for that. I mean, it's really shown as you see it from two different times, so you get slightly different versions of exactly what happened, but he's tempted, he considers doing something that it seems like from his point of view, pretty quickly within that moment, he, stops himself or he regrets it. So is that the failure, or is the failure the reaction to it, the going off and hiding part of it? Because kind of also touching on the reaction that Dom brought up about, how fans have felt really, betrayed by that in terms of their favorite character making that big of a mistake. Is it really that big of a mistake? Is it presented as this kind of irredeemable failure that he then has to go off and sort of sequester himself about? Or is it like, just a kind of more standard character thing of he had a momentary lapse in judgment that he immediately sort of regretted?
I think it's. Oh, go ahead, Emily.
I was just gonna say, I think I'm Emily Strand, by the way, for folks I haven't met. And I wrote over on my shameless plug, the blog that I write for, Hogwarts Professor, that I do think that failure is a main theme of this film, and it's a very leveling theme of the film. You know, and yeah, I think this is a really interesting question of what is the failure. And I'm looking at this little picture of Yoda that you've got here, and I just, in my head, I've got him saying to Luke, when he raises the X-Wing out of the swamp on Dagobah, and Luke says, I don't believe it. And Yoda says, that is why you fail. And so,
Sure.
to Curtis's question about, what is this failure? Is this just a failure? It's not, the failure is not failing, it's failing to get back up again. It's this failure of belief in oneself, belief that you can prevail even though you have been unsuccessful in the past. And is Luke's biggest failure his hiding out on Ahch-To, or is it what happened between him and Kylo Ren, or his failure in response to Rey not to jump on the Millennium Falcon and go help out when needed? But yeah, I mean, I wonder about that, believing in oneself enough to persevere through the failure, and how that lesson carries over to this film.
And another nuance to the question, Ben Bassett in the chat asks, is this a believable failure for Luke? For the long-term fans of the story who have invested in the character, is that what's bothering people, or is it more the failure itself? Is it the failure as presented in characterization? What is it that's kind of rubbing people the wrong way?
I find failure very
easy. Or shouldn't they have it rubbed the wrong way?
I guess I have more trouble believing success sometimes than I do failure. Failure is such a human thing. And I didn't fall in love with Star Wars until I was 38. So I don't have the baggage of having played with Luke action figures all my life, and having collected them. And I mean, I'm a big fan of Luke, but when he was embittered and afraid and isolated on that island, I was like, yeah. I'm kind of surprised Obi-Wan wasn't that way on Tatooine, but for whatever reason he wasn't.
Luke was my hero when I was younger, and I certainly had my share of action figures. But just to provide some context, and going back to Kat's original question, at the end of Return of the Jedi, Luke was the icon of compassion in the Star Wars universe. He forgave his father. He saw the light side in Darth Vader, who's basically space Hitler. So that's why his temptation to kill Ben, even though it's momentary, even though he overcomes it, is a pretty big failure. It would be like Mother Teresa, her faith in Christianity lapsing, which my understanding is it did. But
yeah.
It's that level of failure. And also, of course, the consequence of that immediate failure was Ben Solo turning to the dark entirely, killing all the other Jedi. So there are repercussions to that. Whether it's believable, again, I go into this more in my blog post, so I won't dwell on too long. But I think it makes sense, and there's a lot that happens between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. 30 years, a lot of room for character development. I think it makes sense with the character, though. And one of the things I like about it is that it would have been very easy for the film to try to rationalize the failure and say, oh, Luke was tempted to kill Ben because he had a very specific vision that Ben would try to kill Han, or that Ben would do this, or that we understood why Luke was tempted to do this. It was rational. But that wouldn't be as human a failure. That would be, that adding logic to it, that rationalization, I think, would make the character arc less powerful. By making it vague, by leaving what Luke does morally ambiguous, it's more of a failure. And I think that's why it sends Luke into such a funk. That's why he goes into exile, because it is a big deal. It's not just, it wasn't as clear as, do you kill baby Hitler? So I don't know, so it worked for me in that sense.
Yeah, I would agree.
I was gonna say the word that Luke uses is instinctual. Like it was it was a very human type of failure. But go on, David.
Oh, I hope I don't take us too far off of this line of reasoning, but I think one of the things that caused me to believe, to like that aspect of Luke's failure in that moment where he has that momentary feeling of wanting to kill Ben, is that, for me anyways, it highlights the fact that The Last Jedi in particular, we've been talking a lot about failure at an individual level, but I think The Last Jedi has a very conscious also approach to the question of institutional failure. And I think that moment where Luke ponders killing Ben is when he recognizes the possible institutional failure of the Jedi Order, right? That's what sends him into this exile. And it's one of the overarching themes, I think, of this movie as a whole. And that's a really crystallizing moment for me anyways in that film, to highlight, all right, institutionally, there's, whether it's the Jedi Order, the failure of proper governance with the Empire and the Republic and the new rebellion governments, or even just the class inequality that we see in this movie as well. And so I think that particular moment, I think, is a great way in the film where they unite that aspect of individual failure with institutional failure.
And that theme of institutional failure is so germane to Star Wars. I think people who've dismissed the prequels have also sort of dismissed recognizing that theme, because that the prequels are not just the story of Anakin Skywalker's downfall. It's the downfall of the Jedi Order, and that's the subtext of all those films that I think people will dismiss. And it's, I think maybe folks would, I don't know, maybe embrace this film a little bit more if they, not that lots of people have, of course, but some of the problems seem like the same problems that people had with the prequels.
Spoken like someone who didn't have a visceral reaction to the prequels based on their childhood memories of what Star Wars is supposed to be. Yeah, so one of the things I really liked about sort of the flashbacks where we see Luke and Kylo and Luke's moment of failure is the progressive revelation and the subjectivity of it, because it really gives that from a certain point of view type of feeling to it, where you're getting Luke sort of initially telling Rey, like, well, this is what happened, and then like she gets from Kylo Ren, like, well, this is what happened in my view. Like, I wake up and there's Luke standing over me ready to kill me. And then like you get more of it from Luke, and it's kind of this progressive revelation there. And from a perspective of like failure too, like I wonder how much like Luke not telling maybe like the full story like in the beginning is that believe that sort of subjective feeling of failure. Because I don't think the right question is is it believable that Luke failed, because like Emily said, like that shows humanity. Like everybody fails at some point, and it's not like Luke didn't fail at all in the original films. But I think it's how big of a failure does he believe he made? And like maybe externally we can all look at it and be like, yeah, it was a momentary lapse, and like, okay, it sucks that like it drove your nephew into becoming like this evil guy who like kills lots of people and whatever. But like you got to forgive yourself those those momentary lapses to some degree. And like it's easy for us to say that, but maybe in the subjective moment, I'm sure many people, if not everyone, has those moments of like defining failure that probably to some degree we're all still dealing with as we age, and kind of think like, if only I'd done something different in that moment, like things could have gone so differently. And I think that's true from a believability standpoint if you see Luke as someone who's internalizing that failure, even if from an external standpoint we can look at it and say like it's not as bad or as big or as unrecoverable as it might seem to that individual.
And that's what I find really interesting about Luke's failure in this movie, because it's you know it's in a way it's a corollary to his journey in Return of the Jedi. In Return of the Jedi, Luke's whole character arc was about compassion, showing compassion towards Vader, bringing him towards the light. And so I think a lot of fans saw Luke as the icon of compassion, and oh well, he would never do this to Ben, blah blah blah. But what we see in Last Jedi is in Return of the Jedi, Luke showed compassion towards another person. In the Last Jedi, he has to show compassion towards himself. He has to forgive himself. And I think Curtis, as your comment was hinting at, it's sometimes harder to forgive ourselves for our failures than it is to forgive others. You know, we can say the other, objectify them a bit, but you know, sometimes we are our own worst enemy, and we're the ones that hold ourselves back. And Luke had to learn that lesson of extending the same compassion to himself that he extended to Vader.
Can I interrupt us for 1 second? Let's go around and introduce ourselves, because I thought everyone could see your names, and I don't know that that's true. So, and I forget that not everybody knows each other. So, I'll start. I'm Kat. Most of you probably know me since, you know, Curtis and I are running these things, but yeah, let's go around the circle.
Well, I'll go next. I'm Curtis, and yeah, like Kat, I'm obviously a co-host here with the Movie Club. We do a podcast together as well, Kat and Kurt's TV review, and I've graduated from Signum University, of course, which is the parent organization to Mythgard last year, and still do some kind of marketing and website stuff for them. So that's me.
Am I next in the row? It's hard to see. Well, I'll go. My name's Dave Maddock. I'm also a MA student at Signum. I'm finishing up my thesis on applying lexomics to Kinewolf's Old English poetry. So hopefully I will finish that someday. I'm a software engineer by trade and a lifelong Star Wars fan.
Already did my introduction briefly, but I'm Dominic Nardi again. I also have written about politics and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. You can search those articles online if that sounds like something you'd be interested in.
As I said, I'm Emily Strand. I am a religion professor and a catechist here in my home diocese of Columbus, Ohio, and I write for John Granger's blog, Hogwarts Professor, mostly about Harry Potter, but I sort of cover the Star Wars beat. And as I said before, I am a new fan. I'm a sometime student at Signum Mythgard, and I came to my love of Star Wars through Amy Sturgis's The Force of Star Wars class just about 3 years ago. So I'm a new and very ardent, zealous Star Wars fan.
I'm Kelly Arazi. I am also a student at Signum, about to start my thesis on Monday as soon as the semester starts, and I'm hoping to do it on Harry Potter, so that's really cool. I've watched Star Wars since I was a kid, but I also took the class with Emily on Star Wars a few years ago, and for the first time really looked at it through a different type of lens. So this is really fun for me to kind of put it into the grander scope of learning and looking at things academically. So it's really fun.
Great. So yeah, maybe actually one thing I did want to point out, I meant to point out too, is I didn't notice that, I didn't know this while watching the movie, but Yoda's comment there that's up on the presentation, pass on what you have learned, strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also, which Kelly was talking about that last addition there. That's actually a parallel from Return of the Jedi, the pass on what you have learned. And what's really interesting is I think in that instance, looking back at that and looking at the context, that's where, you know, Yoda's like dying, right? He's on his deathbed and he's like, pass on what you've learned, there's another Skywalker, et cetera, et cetera. And like in that instance, I think it is that strength mastery that he's talking about, right? Like pass on all the good things you've learned here on Dagobah and whatever. And sort of adding to that, the weakness, folly, failure, you almost have to wonder, like, I mean, obviously this is however many years later, you know, and we're sort of retconning maybe, but like you could almost see Yoda like meaning that other part at the end there too, like that's what learning is. It's not just always you know, always the good parts or you know, the new knowledge that you get, but it's, you know, like what the slide title suggests, that it's the greatest teacher, failure sometimes. So
Oh, yeah.
just wanted to point out.
We see that in different characters in the movie, like Poe, who fails a lot in a lot of different ways. But by the end, he has to learn through his experiences, through his own weaknesses, through his own failures, and Finn as well, who is still learning, I think. But Rey herself is someone who's searching for answers, and she doesn't get them straight on. You know, she doesn't ever, even when she goes down and looks at that kind of Dagobah moment where she like goes into the fog and she looks for an answer, and she tells Kylo that she thought for sure she would find the answer she's looking for, and she didn't. I think it's because, like Kurtz was saying, she has to learn from her own experiences, and not be given the answers straightforwardly.
Yeah, and I think I want to build off what Emily was saying before about incorporating the prequels, because I think if you incorporate the prequels, Yoda's quote in this movie isn't just a 2017 innovation in Star Wars. Yoda in Return of the Jedi was teaching Luke based on his own failures in the prequels. We didn't know the prequels back in 1983, obviously, but if you look at the story of episodes 1 through 6, in episodes 2 and 3, Yoda is a very different character. He's much more aggressive. He's much more willing to whip out the lightsaber and start fighting. In episode 3, he goes to challenge Darth Sidious because he's so confident he can take on the Sith Lord. And he fails. He fails to prevent the Galactic War. He fails to stop the Sith using violence. And so when you see him in Empire Strikes Back, Yoda's lessons are very different. There are, don't be aggressive. Don't be the first one to strike. Don't give in to the dark side. Don't take the lightsaber into the cave with you. So those lessons that he's giving in Empire Strikes Back are directly based on the failures that he had in the prequels. So I actually think his quote in The Last Jedi is entirely consistent with how he approached his pedagogy in Empire Strikes Back.
Well, and not to mention, you know, however many years of the Clone Wars that we have, right, to see Yoda sort of even more of a teacher. And I know it kind of jumps back and forth between stories there, but particularly thinking about kind of the end of the series, where he sort of goes off on his mission to find the Force priestesses and all of that, and faces his own darkness and all of that, like as part of that journey. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I don't remember all of the exact steps there, but there, you know, it's there's almost like a similar thing there where he's facing, like, you know, his own inner darkness and all of that, kind of similar to Luke in the cave. And then, you know, we can talk about Rey and her weird mirror reflection thing that happens in this maybe at some point. But yeah, just agreeing with you on that, Dom, I guess.
This is just all the more reason for Qui-Gon Jinn's Force Ghost to show up in the next episode. It would just be so great to have just a little bit more Qui-Gon Jinn, just a little.
I agree, although, well, we might be getting into like deep canon here, but like I thought that like he never fully like train, and so like he can only appear as like a disembodied voice. But that might just be they did it that way because like they couldn't get the actor to like come back, or you know, they couldn't get Liam Neeson to come back. He
appeared as a Force Ghost in the Clone Wars, but I think that was only on Mortis, if I remember correctly. Funny things happen on Mortis. We don't talk about what happened on Mortis. So
what happens on Mortis stays on Mortis.
It may not have been a real Force Ghost.
Right. No, but he was the little lights and then the voice there. But there's another time that he appears, but it's questionable whether it's like a true
It's
vision.
actually him.
Yeah.
All right.
Sharon Hoff asks, do you think we will see Rey fail? She says she is no Skywalker, but rather feels more like a Kenobi. They have her set up to rescue the last remaining Skywalker, Ben. Will they have her fail or succeed?
First, I think we do see Rey fail in this movie.
Yeah.
We see her fail to bring Luke to the Resistance, like she was meant to do. And it is her failure as well as it is Luke's. And then I would say she crashes pretty hard in her little meetup with Kylo Ren. That doesn't go, as Luke says, that does not go the way that she has planned. Although, some interesting things come out of it. So she does not fail to float stuff, though, which I think is a really good thing for her.
Yeah, and I'm sure we could go character by character. I probably should have added Rey in here somewhere, but I couldn't think of a good actual quote to put for her.
She cries in almost every scene in the movie. Have you noticed that? She cries so much in this movie.
Yep.
I don't know what to make of it. I didn't mind it. It didn't make her a weak character, in my opinion, but I wonder how others might have, how that might have affected them or
I noticed the same thing. And she cries, I think everything moves her so deeply. And I think that it's a really strong move for a movie like Star Wars to not be afraid of emotion in that way, or in a lot of the ways that they have done in this movie, particularly. But she is, and it's not, I don't know, it's a lot of the times I think it is about her personal past that she is crying about, or about what she expects. But Curtis, you said you didn't know what maybe quote to put for her, but she does actually say, she tells Luke, you didn't fail Ben failed you. I won't fail you.
Sure.
And I don't know if that's exactly true. I think she wants to be true, but I don't know if you can want to not fail somebody, as much as you can, but you can't predict the future, and you don't know what's going to happen. And ultimately, she does leave Luke. I don't know.
Is that the same sort of hubris that Luke even talks about that the Jedi have in general?
I think so. I mean, if it's not hubris, what is? I mean, she goes off and she tries to, and after 2 conversations with Kyle, like, if you think about it, they had 3, with one of our Facebook followers called it Force Time, TM.
Force timing,
So they talked 2 or 3 times, and the first 2 times she is calling him a monster and a snake and all that sort of stuff. And then it's like one conversation later and she's like, wait, there's still good in him. And then she goes off and thinks that she can single-handedly change his mind. And that's got to be hubris. I mean, it's got to be that same sort of, I'm all sorts of powerful, even if I don't fully understand the power within me, I could use it. I don't know.
Not just that she thinks she's powerful.
Go ahead.
It's not that she thinks she's powerful, but it's that she thinks she can be the next Luke Skywalker, because what she tries to do is exactly what Luke tried to do in Return of the Jedi, and she fails. So there's kind of this interesting dynamic where she thinks, oh, Luke's not coming, maybe I can do this myself, but she can't. So, and that's a pretty big failure. And then there's the consequence too of her little adventure ends up in Snoke being dead, and I don't know if that's good for the galaxy. In that you basically have an emo teenager now in charge of the First Order. I don't know if that's good. I think the galaxy might have been better off had Snoke remained in charge of the First Order. He was evil, but he seemed like a stable genius, for lack of a better term. Where Kylo Ren seems like he might really unleash some devastation on the galaxy. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if Rey's failure has more consequence than we think it does at this point.
I don't know if I agree with hubris, though. I identified it more as naivety. Where she's just so idealistic that she just doesn't And I mean, in a sense, it works in her favor with the, if we're assuming that the death of Snoke is a good thing, it works in her favor. But I didn't see it as hubris so much. I don't really get that vibe from her at all. It's more
So
that quality where Yoda said, she believes, she does believe, despite all this having come from nowhere and no one, she does believe.
yeah, so I was kind of thinking like maybe that idea of like I don't know enough of how I can fail, so I don't know that I can fail. So
You don't know
I
what to do.
try to do this and wind up succeeding because you just didn't know that it was possible to fail anyway. Maybe I don't know.
It's like kids in real life who watch a movie like Star Wars, who see superheroes doing crazy things with a lightsaber and think, oh, okay, if somebody shoots me, I can take a sword and deflect a bullet. Well, you can't. Our legends sometimes have greater powers than we do, and you can't always do what they do. You can't always emulate them that way.
That I think was like one of the most interesting themes of this movie is the idea of legends living up to themselves, legends living up to expectations, the total dismantling of them, and then at the end, a total resurgence of hope within the legends, coming back in the real world in a very powerful way. I don't want to change tactics completely, but like Dom was saying, I think that is a really interesting kind of theme within this movie, and it's all connected to choices and failure and mistakes and all that sort of stuff.
Well, and that's kind of where I threw in the quote there from Leia of "We fought till the end, but the galaxy has lost all hope." And I feel like, and feel free to disagree with me, and whatever. I feel like that's her expressing her own, at least subjective, failure when nobody else, responds to the distress call. Right? Nobody else arrives to help them. Now, I mean, then Luke kind of, sort of arrives and helps them, get away. But to me, that's whether we see it ultimately as failure. There's, we see the legend building at the end, and maybe, in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not a failure because it, drew Luke out and it, created him as even more of a legend, and that will lead to further uprising, and it'll be the spark and all of that. But like, I feel like in that moment, that's her down moment of expressing failure. Like the entire movie from the transports lifting off of whatever planet they were on at the beginning to
The car.
Thank you, to their ending there at Crate, like that it's all kind of been for naught, and her feeling that she has failed as a leader, as someone who is resisting this teenage angst. Although he's not, like, Kylo Ren's something like 29 or something in the thing. Like, he's like 10 years older than Rey is, even, like, I think in the context of the story. So like, it is kind of weird to think of him as a teenager, but he totally acts like one. Anyway, so all that to say that, like, that's kind of why I included her in there at the end, because I do feel like, at least for her, she seems to feel like that's a failure, that they've failed, and I think she even says at one point, like, the spark is out, right? Like the light's gone or something along those lines. I don't have the exact.
I feel like it's not exactly like the rebels or the resistance actions that have failed them. It's the loss of hope, and especially coming from Leia, who of course is the most famous line, "It's help me, you're my only hope." She is identified with hope both within and without the Star Wars films, and especially in this movie, they Holdo and Poe, and they have that moment of what does Leia say about hope? If you can see it all the time, it's not really there. It's the hope. It's right. When you're not there, that's hope. So she's identified with this feeling of hope, and for her to say that at the very end, that for me was one of the saddest moments. Is that she's lost it within herself. She's lost it within the galaxy. To her, has lost it. I thought that was a really interesting choice and a really, really sad one as well.
That is why she fails.
Mm-hmm.
I just keep coming back to that line. This idea of hope and belief and, you know, kind of this intangible thing that draws us forward even when we don't know that we're going to succeed, and, you know, got to hold on to it. And that's what Rey has. I think that's what Rey has that keeps pushing her forward.
I could add one more piece to this failure conversation that I thought was really interesting, and this is more of a metatextual comment, in that usually this is the second film of the sequel trilogy, and usually in the second act of a 3-act play, the second act is when you want your characters to start feeling a bit. You know, they're struggling, they don't know what to do, they're searching for the dragon to follow, they having to overcome the obstacle, and even in Star Wars, if you look at Attack of the Clones, which is the second act of the prequels, or Empire Strikes Back and the original trilogy, the characters fail in those movies. What's really interesting in this movie is that Rian Johnson took what is just normally what happens in a plot and made it a theme. Yeah, so it's not just text, but it's not just subtext, but it's also text, or it's not just text, but it's also subtext. However that goes, but it's integrated into the story in an interesting way.
Yeah, and that reminds me. I think it was actually I was having a conversation with you, Dom, over chat, like after I first saw it, and saying like the kind of not the biggest thing that I would have expected, but like one of the sort of weirdest things maybe is how it ends, because I do think it definitely ends on that more hopeful note, and it almost feels like it ends in the beginning of a third act rather than at the end of a second act, similar to how Empire ends. You know, where it's a lot bleaker, you know, sort of outlook for the rebels at that point. I don't know that I have anything more valuable to say than just that, but just kind of reminded me that that was coming off of my first viewing. That was sort of how I felt like, oh, given all of the themes of failure and sort of maybe despair that are in it, it does actually it ends on that hopeful note, you know, with the stable boy and the, you know, broom and all of that. The broom boy who has a name, but I don't remember what it is, even though you just told me.
Like, Tamari.
There you go.
I knew that.
Harry Potter. That's what I heard. I heard you say Harry Potter.
Pretty much.
Basically.
Like Accio Broom.
That's his alias.
Yes, very much so. Kelly, you brought up Poe's frequent failures, which also brings up maybe the concept of some of the gender topics that we were discussing, or that have been discussed by many people, and I know have been discussed, I think, at least in one of the blog posts one of you wrote. I've read so many blog posts, I can't keep them all straight, but wanted to you know, bringing that into the discussion a little bit too, and not just in reference to Poe, but overall, perhaps, although there's certainly a lot of Poe that we can talk about here. Actually, Emily, maybe I'll throw it to you, because I think you brought up both of these articles to the panelists kind of when we were discussing what to talk about. And, you know, maybe you can sort of give your thoughts, and then we can just kind of keep the conversation going from there.
Yeah, I did. I took those two blog posts that were so strikingly kind of discordant, and I wrote about them with the context of this theme of failure, and because that's the thing. Well, you know, I do very much admire Bishop Barron, and I follow his thoughts on popular culture as I follow his thoughts on many things. And I use them in my classroom and everything. So when somebody pointed out his blog to me, a female former colleague of mine, and was talking about how angry his review made her, and she just like couldn't get out of her head, and it just like ruined her day and everything. And so I read it, and it, you know, I kind of had the same reaction, like, oh my gosh, really? Like this is what you saw? And I thought it was just, I mean, his take is this. It's the first quote there on your screen. It's this idea that the mythic, you know, dimensions of the franchise were just, you know, eclipsed by this ideologically driven, you know, feminist agenda, aggressive feminist agenda. And I really didn't see the movie like that at all. I thought that was a really an oversimplification. But I had already read the previous the one from Den of Geek that's below it, that's basically says that this whole film is a diatribe against toxic masculinity. Now, listen, I am a firm believer in the reality of toxic masculinity. I'm not sorry everybody, but you know, I am somebody who laments it on a regular basis. But I thought that, and at first I was like, huh, yeah, they're right, and Poe, and he's always mansplaining people and everything. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was just like, yeah, that's too simplistic. Because the first thing that I came away with, probably midway through the movie, is I really didn't like that Holdo. I was all ready to like her because I had read the Leia young adult novel, and I was like, hey, this is like, she's like Luna Lovegood. She's super spacey, but she comes through in the end, and like, she's got purple hair. It's really cool. I was ready to like her. I love Laura Dern, and I was like, wow, she reminds me of a really insecure and power hungry former coworker that, you know, like I couldn't stand her. And I didn't understand why she wasn't collaborating more with Poe, you know, since Leia obviously trusted him. You know, what was her agenda against Poe? So I tried to point out in the post how I just thought that both of these extreme interpretations of the film were just that, where they were extreme and they were missing a lot of the nuance and the subtext of the film, and we've talked a lot about that already, which is failure. And this is, you know, this is just something that does not take sides in the gender war. In this movie, everybody fails. I mean, Holdo fails in the ultimate way. You know, she has to give her life to even save a remnant of the resistance that she had this, you know, objective to protect. And, you know, I think when you know, my brother is a pilot, and he says any crash you walk away from is a success. You know, even if you crash the plane, if you walked away, it's a success. Well, she doesn't walk away, you know, from her act. And even though she, you know, she does achieve something, it's still this really ultimate failure. And I don't think that Poe is just this mansplaining mess either. I mean, he's right. And I think the scenes are carefully drawn so that we will identify and side with Poe. So I don't think I think it's really overly simplistic to say that this is just some sort of feminist agenda. And, you know, the major argument I made against that is the fact that, you know, Luke Skywalker saves everybody in this movie. You know, I mean, he is, first of all, you've got this plot starting in The Force Awakens that we have to get Luke back because he's the answer to our problems. You know, that's problematic from this point of view of saying that this has a feminist agenda. And then finally, when Luke does, you know, in the end, provide the ruse, and, you know, in this extremely powerful, most powerful act of force manipulation I think we've ever seen in Star Wars, what he does at the end of this film, and then allows the remnant to escape through this act, thus sacrificing himself. I mean, he saves everybody. And if we're going to read ideological statements into the film and into the events of the film, I think this one is rather paternalistic, you know, with this magic man that comes and kind of saves everybody. So, I mean, you know, I don't really see it that way either. It's just, but the argument could be made to counter the idea that it's, you know, aggressively feminist. So, yeah, so those are kind of my views on that.
The one thing I wanted to add, though, is, like, I think you're right that I think the movie prompts us to, and that a lot of people look at, like, the, you know, Luke coming, distracting to save us. But let's not discount the fact that, like, had Rey not been up, like, taking up all of Snoke's attention and, like, working with Kylo Ren, like, there would have been a lot more attention being paid to those people who were escaping. And then obviously she and Chewie come out and, you know, draw off the fighters so that like there's a lot of attention and awareness of Luke as, you know, the waving my lightsaber around, being the distracting thing going on here, while Rey's off doing all of, like, this other stuff to, you know, actually help save the people, like, and provide, you know, lift the rocks and to fly the ship and do all of these things that you could almost draw a parallel there. And I'm actually just sort of thinking of this. This isn't something I thought about until you were just speaking, Emily. But, you know, like Leia's comment about Holdo, not being as concerned with the glory and the heroism, but being more concerned about preserving the light. Like you could almost apply that to Rey and Luke. Like Luke is the flashy one with the lightsaber out front, while Rey's in the back lifting the rocks and, you know, making an escape hole for the people to actually get out. So like even that, like I don't think it's as like it's not as clear as like, oh, Luke saved the day. It's like, well, no, they both saved the day. And without either of them, the day would not have been saved for any of the rest of the resistance fighters.
Well, I agree with that. And I think the problem is when you try to stick the film into these gendered boxes. I think anytime you do that, you can come up with a counterpoint that kind of messes with your interpretation. So I didn't find either of those very gendered interpretations of the film to be very helpful at all. Because I think you're right. It's a lot more nuanced than it may look on the surface.
Another way of putting this is, are the lessons that Poe learns lessons that might be beneficial to some characters who are women? And I think you all know Battlestar Galactica and Starbuck, who is the Poe Dameron of Battlestar Galactica, who's the hotshot pilot and always has these crazy plans. Starbuck is the Poe. She would probably have the same lessons. She probably has, I'd argue she has to learn those lessons about following orders. So it's, you know, it's not an invalid interpretation of the film to say this film speaks to me because it reminds me of issues of toxic masculinity and so on and so forth. But it's not. But the failures and successes of the characters aren't specifically tied to gender in that way. I don't think. I think they're more universal than that.
Well, and I think we're going to have trouble if success and failure are the only barometers we use to discuss the success of how any characters are written, male or female, or that's the only way we can talk about gender is we have a scorecard and we see who came up winning. And based on your point value, it's either, you know, misogynist or misandrist, you know, like surely there must be other ways to, and I'm not saying you guys are, but I think like a lot of the conversation is driven around that of like who won the movie. And like I've gone on this diatribe about kind of disliking the term strong female characters for that reason. Like I think by any standard, Rey qualifies for that. But as you guys are saying, they're not afraid to show emotion. You know, a lot of times making a female character strong means making her masculine. But here, that's not necessarily true. I mean, in some ways, she might break gender stereotypes, but in others, she's allowed to be more, quote, feminine in her display of, you know, emotion or intuition or whatever those traditional female qualities are. So I think the theme of failure is certainly interesting, but I think we get into problems when we tie that too closely into the discussion of gender.
Yeah,
Just
and I
along
think
those lines. Oh, go ahead.
I think it's important too to remember that feminism is about the equality, right? And it's not saying that women are better than men, but it's about a balance, which is what the Force is about. And I think that there's a lot to say and think about in terms of what they're doing when it comes to balancing genders and life and death and all of these things that we kind of consider as opposites in this way. As you know, there's something between everything that's in the middle and every character. And I think we actually learn more from not just Rey, but in Luke, but like other characters. We learn a lot from Rose. I think that her vision and her feminine characteristics, like love, is what ultimately will carry a lot of the characters forward. And I think that there's a lot to learn in what's between these opposites.
And building up Kat's point too, and just about how female characters are sometimes made more masculine. One of the things I like that Last Jedi did is it embraced the femininity of the female characters. You know, if you notice, a lot of them wore rings, and that was actually, I think that was something that Carrie Fisher suggested. Admiral Holdo wears a pink dress, not obviously not a military uniform, and she has purple hair, or it might be a purple dress, but she wears a dress. She looks female. And even Leia's outfit is more feminine than what she wore in Force Awakens, which is more of a masculine army uniform. So it's kind of interesting how the film went in that direction, and it wasn't afraid to embrace those aspects of femininity.
Yeah. And another moment I really liked is they weren't afraid to embrace the female bond with Holdo, especially that moment of Leia saying goodbye to Holdo. So rare is it in a film like Star Wars, I feel, that we get to see a female bond like that. In that the moment where they're just grasping hands, and it's this love between two women and this admiration and respect. And it's a really powerful moment, and it's between two women, and that's really important. I think it's a really, I just liked a lot of the choices they made in terms of that.
From
Carrie
what I
Fisher wrote that
understand,
scene.
that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, Carrie Fisher wrote that scene.
She did.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. From what I understand, she wrote that. No, it's fine. That she wrote that and came up with that, and that just based on the one article I read, that Laura Dern, really wanted to express like it's an expression of appreciation and friendship and all of that between characters and respect. But it was also Laura Dern saying to Carrie Fisher like all of those same things in the subtext, and all of that was really
incredible. And it makes sense because it's not something I think we see a lot of the time. So hats off to Carrie Fisher.
Want to bring up, so Sharon mentions in the comments, I think going back, I don't remember who mentioned this, but asking, why do we see Holdo's sacrifice as a failure, but Luke's sacrifice as a success? And I'll just sort of throw my 2 cents in there, but I don't, was this Emily or I don't remember who was talking about that, but like to me, I don't think it's so much that I think it's that the plan that Holdo sort of was masterminding ended up being a failure. But I don't know that. And I did try to think of a quote for Holdo as well on the previous slide there of the failures, and I couldn't come up with one because I think of all the people like not that maybe she doesn't like I think there are some things that she could have done better or differently or whatever. I don't know that I would say that the failure is really hers in that instance. But I guess to add another layer into it, it's like, where do we lay sort of the ultimate blame? Like at that point, like from a military command perspective, she's at the top, right? Like, so is this like she's the ultimate person and can't pass the buck? And so like ultimately at some level, everything that happens is sort of her responsibility, whether it's failure or success or whatever. Or do we blame like Poe, who, fosters a mutiny and goes against that? Do we blame Finn and Rose for kind of going off and doing their own thing, which Poe is involved in as well? And how far back like does that chain, like how far back can you place blame like in sort of the chain of events that lead up to the failure? And I see the failure there being up the plan and transports getting shot at and all of that before Holdo ultimately does what she does. So just kind of throwing that out there, like, and any thoughts, reactions, comments, personal attacks?
I won't personally attack, but I will say that Luke, I'm only judging Luke's final act there by his own standards. He said he went to that island to die. So he figured out a pretty good way to help his friends and to achieve that goal without, committing suicide or anything macabre like that. I mean, he gave his life, but that was his goal to die. I never heard that a stated goal of Holdo. So that's the kind of judgment. But I mean, again, I think there's just nuances galore in all these things. The main point I was making in terms of Luke being the one who saves everybody in this film was against the argument that there's some overly aggressive feminist, which really is, veiled term for feminazi or whatever agenda in this film. I was just trying to make an argument against that. I really think that, Luke's failures are many, obviously, but, in his death, it's really a success for him.
I also think Holdo's end was a more of a preventable tragedy in that Holdo was a new leader coming to a new ship with a new crew, and like many leaders going to new organizations, didn't know the people. There were morale issues. It wasn't just Poe who mutinied. There's actually several characters, including some female pilots, including Rose and Finn. So that was indicative of a larger morale problem on the ship. Not that she should have told everybody on the ship her plan, but leadership is tough. And Leia, I think, showed a very different model of leadership where she saw Poe acting up and she said, "Come here," and whacked him across the face, and then took him inside softly and said, "This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it." Holdo didn't have those leadership skills, so I think that's really that's why it's more of a failure, because it's something that could have been prevented had things worked out a bit differently.
Yeah, I think where they both fail, if we're talking about Luke and Holdo, is they withhold information when it's really important to teach and to be open and honest. Holdo, obviously, with Poe, I don't quite see the reason why she couldn't just tell him the plan. I don't see why every single person on that darn ship couldn't know exactly what was going on. But I do think that, she doesn't have to tell them, but certainly I think she withheld information that she didn't need to. And Luke with withholding the truth of the moment where he failed Ben. If Rey heard that from Luke first, would things turned out differently? Would she have such a strong reaction to try to suddenly believe Kylo Ren could be saved, suddenly be sort of more on the side of, let's go after him, he's our hope and you're not? I don't know, but I think that the failure, if there's a Venn diagram of their failures, it meets with not teaching and not being open in communication.
Yeah. So Sharon brings up actually another point that I've seen elsewhere, and I don't remember this in the movie, but maybe it's sort of an offhand comment of there being the issue of a potential leak within the Rebel ship. So that's why Holdo is staying so close to the vest with her plan. I guess my thought or my reaction to that is, she also says, like, I've dealt with flyboys like you who are dangerous and whatever. And like, if she knows that and knows that flyboys like Poe can be sort of, well, can go off half cocked or whatever, like, then maybe there is, like, given Leia's clear trust in him at some point, previous to that, like, maybe she should have just taken this side and said, look, I've dealt with people like you, but Leia trusted you, so I'm going to trust you too. And like, there might have been a way to split the hair there, like, and do a little more, trusting him without trusting the entire ship with the information.
Exactly. And it's not like I think she has absolutely no reason to tell him the first time he asks. Like, I mean, that's not exactly like he should listen to orders. But when it comes to the point where there's a mutiny on your ship and you would rather fight back than communicate with your people, I think that is really what hits home for me.
Right. I mean, and this comes up a lot, I think, in, this kind of storytelling where there's this much, this many layers and plot and like very, plot-driven things of like, if everyone just told each other the truth, we wouldn't, like, this would take care of 90% of the plot issues in most of these stories. And a lot of times I think people take that too far. Like, you have to take characterization into context of someone might not want to share this information because of this character motivation or this plot reason or whatever. But I do agree. I think by the time, certainly the way it was presented, by the time the mutiny breaks out, I think it's time to put caution aside and at least tell Poe what's going on.
We do have some people who feel passionately about this responding to all of this. So I won't read through all of the comments here. But yeah, I mean, so the fact is that, like, yes, when Poe found out, he told Finn and Rose, who then, it gets relayed to DJ, who like tells the plan, and that's how the First Order finds out. So there is, like, whether there actually is a leak or not, like, the information does get leaked, and best of intentions and all of that. But I feel like that's kind of a hindsight excuse. Like, if Poe knew, if like Holdo was just like, look, we're not telling everyone because we think there might be a leak, but here's what we're going to do. And she could have even told him a fake plan at that, and like just satisfied his curiosity. Like there's still a communication issue there, and we've got the obligatory quote from Cool Hand Luke as well from Kate Neville sharing that with us, of what we have here is a failure to communicate, right? Like, it's definitely, there definitely was a better way to handle, but yeah, I mean, if everyone communicated perfectly, then we wouldn't need stories like this to like help us search out our own feelings on things, right? So yeah, cool. Any other thoughts? I mean, I don't want to move on necessarily if we have more stuff to say about the gender issues, but I know there were some other things that we had kind of discussed, topically speaking, and if I can get to my second screen here. So one of the other themes here is about letting things go, letting the past die. And maybe we've already touched on this a little bit in our sort of conversation around failures. But what, I guess, and maybe this goes to Dom, some of the comments you were making. I can't remember if it was even here or in our pre-discussion, but around sort of the metatextual elements of like how much of this is, of The Last Jedi, is sort of letting go of the past, as far as in terms of what Star Wars is, what it means, the different ways that it sort of plays off itself. And we do have some other discussions of like those metatextual elements in another slide as well. But both like in the universe itself of like letting the past die, letting things go, moving beyond, there's kind of a lot of that that goes on. What are your thoughts? What did you guys pick out?
So my controversial opinion on this is I actually don't think it's a theme of the movie. There are a few issues here. First of all, look at the first quote. I'm going to pull a Verlin Flieger here. Who says that? What's the context? That's Kylo Ren. He's the one that's saying kill the past. When does the moral lesson of the film come from the villain? Almost never. Usually it's the villain who tells us what we should not do, and then the heroes tell us what we should do. And then when Luke talks about ending the Jedi Order, that is him in cynical, depressed mode before he talks to Yoda. But Luke doesn't end up in the film saying that the past should die. At the end of the film, he says, "I will not be the last Jedi." And even Yoda's quote that you have, the page turners, they were not. It's not. I take that less as that the past should die, more that we should learn from the past, but not dwell in it. Failure and learning from failure is about not dwelling in the past. If you try to kill the past, as Kylo Ren does, that means you're not really learning from failure, because you're just ignoring the past. You're ignoring the failure. Luke embraces the past but moves on. So I think it's a subtly different lesson than just let the past die. It's learn from the past but move on with your life.
Maybe I can synthesize that a little bit, Dom, because I think that line from Kylo, the let the past die but kill it if you have to, I think are actually two distinct actions. So letting the past die is by definition a passive thing. And if something dies under that context, oftentimes it's a just thing, right? It was going to die. You did nothing and it passed away. That's very different from kill it if you have to. And by have to, I mean if you feel like it's just to kill it, right? Those are two very distinct things. And I think there can be goodness and justice in the first thing and almost never in the latter. And I think there's a distinction going on in the movie there, where I think there are things that are appropriate to let pass, and maybe that's the old idea of what the Jedi Order is, for example. But then there are things that would be evil to kill it, like actively ending the Jedi Order, right? Maybe that's taking it one step too far.
And
It's like
look
when
at the
people recommend Machete Order for watching the films,
Right.
where you skip over Phantom Menace completely. I'm like, okay, well, you don't have Qui-Gon Jinn, so sorry about your luck.
Yeah, and look at the character who's not letting the past die. If you really look at his actions, Kylo Ren, he's the one who is playing dress up as Darth Vader, marching around with a bunch of stormtroopers. He
Sure.
wants the Empire 2.0, basically. He's not letting the past die, really. He's, and that's a part of the past that probably should die.
Well, and okay, so he killed his father in the last movie, but we're talking about this movie, and he doesn't kill his mother, right? He ultimately doesn't pull the trigger. So there's also, like how much can we try? Is there a bit of, unreliable narration going on here from him? Like, is this like the idea that I aspire to is letting the past die and killing it if you have to, but even he can't go through with that all the time on his own.
In that moment, he's trying to convince Rey to join him. So what does he want her to do?
Sure.
Oh, forget your past with the Resistance. Forget about who your parents were. Forget about all that bad stuff. Join me and we can have a glorious future together.
I also think that or at least the way I saw it, is I think it's manipulation on his part for sure. Is you speaking to Rey, but that is after he kills Snoke and after that battle, right? And so the way I saw it was him coming to that realization. He comes to the realization in this movie, like you were talking about him. He's not letting the past die because he wants to be Darth Vader 2.0. That's not it anymore. He takes his helmet off because Snoke makes fun of him as being basically like a ridiculous version of Darth Vader. And yes, yeah, exactly. And destroys that, and we never see him in that helmet again. And then up until that moment, he was listening to Snoke to the point where he was kind of taking a part of himself and destroying it. And then this moment, he has killed Snoke, so he is now letting the past die. This is a moment for him. He's learning this, and he is asking Rey to join him. That's how I saw it.
Is he though? And I think that's how he would think of it. But if you look at his actions again, he is still, in a lot of ways, he's still this bitter little kid who saw his master, Luke Skywalker, hovering over him with a lightsaber, and rather than admit the possibility that that was maybe a misunderstanding, rather than try to resolve that conflict, rather than asking Luke when he saw him in Crate, why did you do that? What was going on? Can we resolve this and move beyond the past? He's all bitter about the past. He takes out his lightsaber, starts attacking Luke. He's still consumed with guilt for killing his father. He is still he's not willing to reconsider that decision he made to go to the dark. So I think in a lot of ways he is still living in the past. He's not moving on from it.
And I don't know if he knows that. Do you know what I mean? Like he acts, we call it teenage angst. I think in part because he doesn't really think. He just acts on emotions, and a lot of those emotions are from the past. And so he might really believe that that's what he's doing, killing the past. And that's what he intends to do when he goes out and meets Luke. He wants to kill him. He's part of his past in this major way, and he's done with that. But I think that in another way, he doesn't quite know his own actions and his own what they mean and how much he refuses to let go of the past.
Brandon Minnick also brings up a point that I was thinking about too, of like Yoda's talking about, seeing, for a bibliophile like myself, and I'm sure at least several of you feel the same way, like seeing Yoda burning books is not the image that I had of Yoda, but then of course realizing later that like, oh, the books aren't actually there. And so, and also actually with the tree, I don't know, it kind of looked like the Starbird while it was flaming. I don't know if anyone else.
But cool. I thought so too.
So Brandon, is saying like, he likes how like Yoda's sort of like almost taunting Luke in a way of like saying like Rey has everything, needed from the books. like the books themselves, like actually has the book. She literally has everything that the library contained.
Yeah, on her ship.
At her and like
Repeat them.
given
She's
like
reading them
Luke's right, and given Luke's admission that he didn't read them, like potentially could then learn even more than Luke knew about the Jedi in the long run. So yeah, I like that. That's definitely. I think that supports, Dom, your thesis that maybe it's not letting the past die, but learning the right way to embrace it, or the right way to move forward, acknowledging the past, but realizing that there's still things to be done going forward as well.
Can
Or
I?
like,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
I was
Kelly.
going to say something really short. And I mean, it's not. I think there's a message of not letting go of the past, but also maybe redefining it if we take it into a meta textual. If we take that into account of, this is the Star Wars that you know and love, but this is different, and we are redefining some certain things in a certain way, and we're letting go of some things, and we're going forward with some others. So that's also a way that I chose to see it.
Maybe not being beholden to it, not unthinkingly, unquestioningly carrying on with things just because that's what it has always been.
Can I ask, since we're talking about the past, so Rey says that she has seen Kylo Ren's future. Am I dreaming that? She says that, right?
And he says that of her as well.
Yeah.
So like, how much is Rey seeing visions of the future affecting her decisions, and how much should it factor into our judgments of her decisions or our perceptions of her decisions? Like when she goes to to Kylo Ren's ship in her little coffin pod, is this something that can we kind of rule out hubris, because she may have seen something that made her think that this is the path to this future that she has seen, or this path away from it. I don't know. It's like this complicating factor when a character has this information about potentially about the future. If that's like her kind of force specialty or whatever, seeing the future, how much is this factoring into her decision making right now?
Well, in Star Wars, characters. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm to quote Yoda, always in motion the future is, right? Like the what Rey sees, and she even gives some specifics about what she sees, right? It's that Ren doesn't kneel before Snoke, although then like the first thing he does when they walk in is like he kneels down. So like she's clearly skipping over that part of the future. But then also that he would stand with her, which does happen. And so like if you look at like Kylo Ren killing Snoke and then fighting with the guards and stuff, like that stuff does happen. It's just like, well, but then there's other pieces too, which I think again, like, and I'm just thinking of this now, like is a really nice parallel to the way that we get the past revealed to us through Luke and Kylo Ren's renditions of that scene in the hut or whatever at the training temple. Like we see pieces of it, but that doesn't mean how it's all going to play out. It just means that, like, I think we can believe Rey that she saw those things. It's just like there's more context than she knew about.
I also think seeing the future and thinking that you alone can determine the future, and that your head is always in the future. That's actually one of the biggest sources of failure and hubris in the saga. You go back to Episode 3. The source of Anakin's downfall was the fact that he saw Padme dying in childbirth, and his reaction wasn't, "Okay, I'm going to keep my cool and see what happens." He wanted to crazy extremes to try to prevent that, and that we all know how that turned out. And in Empire, Luke sees the future of his friends, and Yoda warns him, don't go. And it's basically his version of this won't turn out the way you think it will, and it doesn't, and he fails and he loses a hand. So I don't think Luke was the most effective teacher on Ahch-To, and he didn't he didn't properly warn Rey about the dangers of visions of the future the way that Yoda did in Empire. But still, there is this common thread of hubris and thinking that you are the master of destiny being interlinked. You know, as Yoda said, you know, focus on the here and now.
The flashback.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
well, I was going to mention the flashbacks and how much flack that this movie has taken over its use of flashbacks, and especially kind of point of view dependent flashbacks. Because I don't know, I didn't have a problem with them, but I didn't have a lot of the problems that I've heard people talk about in this film. I don't mean to jump the gun. I'd love to hear what people didn't like in the film at some point, but if you have a slide for that, Curtis, I'll wait.
Well, so I do have a few things, but we can do we need to let this slide die? Is that what we're saying? Because I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said kill it.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have a slide for this in particular, but Kate Neville had brought up, I believe, or I think it was her, actually, now that I'm going back, trying to find the comment, about what she sees as some of the logical dissonance in the film. And I think these are more around like the science fiction aspects and the technology and that kind of thing. So like the use of hyperspace as a weapon, you know, dropping bombs in space. Another one that
Empire, by the way.
Yes, well, that's right. And so another one that I've heard about is the ability to track through hyperspace, through light speed, which happens in A New Hope. Like Vader puts a tracking device. Now it's a little different because there's like an active tracking device on the ship, on the Millennium Falcon, and that's how they find Yavin 4 as a base. So yeah, I mean, we can talk through some of those pieces. Yeah, Dom, you brought up the Imperial bombers are bombing the asteroid in, you know, Empire when they're hiding out in the big wormhole. So like the literal hole for a worm, not a space wormhole. But yeah, any thoughts there? Those things did not bother me as much, but I know it did bother some people. So just kind of throwing out those examples or any others of like technology or kind of the things that might have pulled some people out of, you know, the secondary realism of the world there.
I always like a little bad science in my Star Wars. I just feel like it feels cozy. I feel at home with bad science. It reminds me of the parsecs, and it makes me happy.
George Lucas was asked about this once, and actually talking to Matt Stover, who wrote the novelization for Revenge of the Sith, and Matt Stover said, "Well, you know, in the Revenge of the Sith, there are elevators. When they lose gravity, the elevator like starts falling down." And Matt Stover said, "Well, it's not really how gravity works." And Lucas was like, "That's kind of the point." And part of the experience of Star Wars is just being in the moment, suspending your disbelief, and just kind of accepting that the physics we have in our world work in space somehow, and treating it like a World War II space fantasy pistache. That, you know, so like Lucas, he was aware of this stuff. Like he knew how physics worked in space. He just that's not what he's going for.
Yeah, for me, that doesn't pull me out so much. Partly because I'm not a scientist and I'll notice other things, but probably not that sort of stuff. Although my dad, who is a physicist, was definitely muttering things to me when we saw it. But for me, what pulls me out is not the science within the film, but the technology making it. I just am not. I know CGI was used extremely well in this film, in certain ways, and I know that, I mean, like Puppet Yoda, yay! But I also I thought it pulled me out a lot with Snoke. I just sort of despise everything about Snoke and why you had to have a CGI character who sits down the whole time. just kind of like for purely just because we can. So there were some things that were done just, and that's my own preference with general movies is CGI and action, and there's a lot of that in this film. But that's not its fault for being Star Wars. That's just general modern films for me. But those are the big things that pull me out.
At least it's not CGI actual human beings that you've seen in movies before. That, for me, that pulled me out way more. At least Snoke, I can understand the difficulty of trying to achieve any CGI performance that has that amount of screen time. Like, the more time you spend on it, the harder it gets. But at least he's a kind of non-human or more than human character. You know, it's not the same as trying to fully recreate a human performance for me.
It's no Dane the Hobbit. The dwarf.
Well, or Tarkin in Rogue One. That's like the big example for me. And I know like they had Leia at the end, but that's like for like 3 seconds. So like that didn't bother me as much. But right. When you're seeing,
that's kind of what I was thinking of. But I think there was in general a pleasant use of practical effects in this. Like you said, like the puppetry and the fact that like, from what I can tell, a lot of the creatures were built practically with, whatever the giant thing is that he milks, that was like a real, like,
the saga siren
kind of puppet and everything that like, I think when you can do it that way, there's just a practical reality to it that serves the movie well.
Absolutely. And it could have been so much worse. And I hate that I'm fixated on it, but that's just one of my personal buttons. But I thought that and visually, like the starships, which of course are CGI, are beautiful. So there's lots of ways they used it in just stunning ways in this film. So
I'm generally okay with the effects in the film. The one thing that roasts me the wrong way, and this is an issue a bit for me in Force Awakens as well, is the creature designs just aren't doing it for me. And I don't mean this as any offense to Kat, but like they look like Doctor Who aliens, like the aliens in the Canto Bight Casino. They don't look like what I expect from Star Wars aliens, and for some reason they're not using the traditional Star Wars aliens we saw in the sequels and prequels all that often. I actually like the Porgs as a creature design, and I like the other aliens on Octo, Luke's planet, but just the Canto Bight aliens seemed a bit too silly and goofy for me.
And the Canto Bight, everything about Canto Bight was very, very like Earth to me. Like there's some things where like I can suspend my disbelief and be like, yes, this is a fantasy world, like kind of like ours in some ways, and kind of like, but like the casino scene for me was just very much, it was very hitting too close to home. And then you have these weird CGI characters that are very not, I don't know, it didn't really meld with me a lot of Canto Bight.
Well, I know
David Ross said that he when we were on Canto Bight, he felt like we had fallen into the Capitol from the Hunger Games. I was like, yeah, that is kind of. I heard. I think Curtis somebody sent the Rebel Force Radio podcast. The two guests that they had, which I listened to most of, but I was interested to hear how much they compared the Canto Bight scenes to like a second or third tier prequel planet. Which is, it was not meant to be complimentary, it was, they were really, really hard on that whole sequence of Canto Bight.
It felt very like prequel, like I felt like prequel territory for sure. But the message of everything of Canto Bight for me goes down to Rose taking off the rain, I guess, or the heat of the animal. Like, and that's her. She says, it's worth it now. That's how I feel. For all of the Canto Bight, mistakes or the clumsiness of the actual scene, it's worth it for me for that message.
So I think there's two things there, because I know a lot of people have a very strong reaction to, or at least a lot of the reactions that I've read. There seems to be a lot of disfavor with the whole Canto Bight plot and the, Master Code Breaker, MacGuffin, trail and all of that. And so watching it the most recent time on Sunday, like I was kind of watching for that, and like I actually like they don't really spend out of a 2.5-hour movie. They don't actually spend that much time on Canto Bight. There's like 2 like longish scenes, right? One where they kind of like arrive and are going through the casino, and then one where they're escaping, and like that's really it. Not to say that there wasn't stuff that could have been cut out of some of that, because I do feel like some of the like the Fathier's, trampling the casino is like, oh look, we're destroying a lot of rich people's stuff, and like that to me was like, okay, like you could have done like one thing there, but like you don't need like 4 minutes of that maybe. But like, yeah, I think so. Like there's the removing of the rain on the Fathier, which I think is important symbolically, right? Because of Rose's comments about like look deeper, look beyond sort of the flash and the lights of the casino and see kind of who are the people behind it. But also giving of her ring with the rebellion symbol on it to the boy in the stable, which then we come back to sort of unexpectedly that okay, so there's 3 scenes at Canto Bight. I forgot about that last one, but like coming back to that sort of unexpectedly at the end, because I think that's the taking off of the rein from the Fathier and the saddle and all of that is kind of the what they're doing sort of symbolically at the end there of like showing that stable boy and his friends like there is a way to like remove the reins of kind of this war machine, the Star Wars universe equivalent of the military industrial complex or whatever you want to call that, that's sort of funding this wealth in one area, but then having this great disparity with all of these people who we're not like, I'm not quite clear, like are these kids slaves? Because like, I mean, we've had slavery before. Anakin was a slave. Like it is, that's sort of the subtext, but it's never really stated outright whether it's like actual slavery or just like, or I don't mean like just poverty, but like is it a poverty thing where they're kind of like doing, like they're in this situation and that's all they really have available to them and that kind of thing.
The fact checkers on the case.
Yes,
they are street urchins, children abandoned on Cantanica by losing gamblers. Yeah, so they're slaves who are abandoned by parents who can't pay their gambling bills.
Which is kind of what Rey is, it sounds like.
Pretty much, yeah.
Sure.
He's one of them.
Right, sold for drinking money is what Kylo says. I mean, how much do we believe him? Because that's in the moment of trying to convince her to join him. But yeah,
like I was entertained by Canto Bight. Like I was able to turn my inner child on, and there's part of me that likes the fact that it mirrors the prequels, because I'm somebody who believes that the prequels are part of Star Wars. So seeing prequel material in the sequels is kind of nice to feel like they're all part of one same story. My big issue with the Canto Bight sequence was actually kind of Rose, and I hate to say this, but partly because a lot of the themes only came out in exposition. It's very much a tell, not show theme, in that like Rose is the one who says, "Oh, these are war profiteers. This is why we should think this is bad." And I wish they had found a way to show that, where it wasn't just or in DJ later on when they're on the ship, DJ's going on, oh moral ambiguity is great because they sell to this guy and they sell to this side. It's okay, but it's like, show that to me, like make me care about that and feel it, instead of just have a character spout off some dialogue about that. So that was more my issue with the whole Canto Bight subplot.
Yeah, it wasn't subtle, and that for me that was another huge fault of this film. Is I loved the messages and I loved a lot of what it did. I thought its execution in a lot of things was clumsy and not subtle and too in your face. But I liked the messages a lot. But I agree completely. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to just third that and say I think that is probably what made the scene really awkward for me, because of, obviously the prequels don't bother me. Although, Kat, I will say that sometimes when I'm watching Doctor Who, some of the aliens and stuff, I'm like, oh, that's so prequels. Like there's like a lot of like the yeah. Anyway, but that's part of why I like it. You know,
We
another
bash
thing.
on the Doctor Who aliens ourselves too. So
It's leaning into a level of camp which is maybe beyond what I mean. There's a difference between and knowingly and intentionally a difference between a BBC budget and like Industrial Light and Magic, right? Like, and it's a fine line, but there is a difference. So maybe there's a slight bleed over there.
But is there any funnier scene than Yoda hitting R2D2 with a stick? Like, I mean, like let's not raise Star Wars too high up. Like, it was pretty darn campy to begin with. Like,
It can't be, but Luke plays that so straight.
sure.
I'll say that another problem that I had, like, I don't know enough about. Obviously, if I love the prequels, I don't really know enough about CGI to really throw stones. But there were definitely some narrative issues that I felt like. I mean, like when Rey and Kylo Ren kill Snoke and all those guards, and then she zips off, which we don't really see how she does that. She ends up in Snoke's escape pod, which good for her, but we don't really see her get there. And then Kylo Ren just wakes up to Hux, asking what happened, and then Hux just believes him that Rey killed
Does he
all
though?
people by herself.
I don't think
And
he has a moment to. He just
he
I
has
mean,
like,
oh,
I don't know that Hux believes him. Like, Kylo chokes him into submission.
but why
yeah.
is he, I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I guess, is this guy just like the most powerful sheriff in town? Is that why he's still in charge? I didn't really understand how you could get away with killing the supreme leader and having a very flimsy excuse, or blaming it on somebody else, and then yet he's still able to command this army. Is it just because he's powerful?
Time to throw a Snoke grenade in here. I think this is why I think the film did need an explanation, however brief, of who Snoke was, because when that happens, when Ben kills him, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means for Ben or the First Order. And I was sitting there like, why is everybody okay that Ben Solo is now the supreme leader of the First Order? Like, if Hitler or Mao, when Hitler, Mao, Stalin, when those larger than life charismatic figures died, there was chaos in those political systems. That Germany was a different case, but when Stalin and Mao died, the repercussions lasted for years, and you had a lot of infighting at the upper levels. And yes, Ben Solo is the big bad guy who can use the Force and choke Hux, but it seemed like a very easy transition, and just giving Snoke some context might have helped with that.
But is this like, so Kylo's ascendancy is a field promotion essentially, though, right? Like when we don't know where the First Order stronghold is at this point, but this is like, of the people who survived, however many Star Destroyers get destroyed themselves, like Kylo's like the current strongest person, like right there and then. I guess the question remains, like, is he able to consolidate that power when they meet up with like whoever's still back at home base, wherever home base is? It's not Starkiller base because that's gone, but like whatever the First Order base is, like, can Kylo Ren keep that power? I see this as just like I don't know, like, we don't know how many people survive from Snoke's ships, but like there's not more than like what, half a dozen or 8 like AT-AT walkers and like 1 transport ship that he has. So it's not like he's got like a huge army right there with him at the time either. So I don't know, like yes, I see what you're saying. Like, is he the strongest person? Like, kind of, he is in the moment, at least. And he's at least strong enough to like get Hux to follow him. And like that goes back to Snoke's comments about like, a well whipped cur, keeping him at your side, like, is going to do wonders for your leadership capabilities. So
Well, and it's part of
That's
that about, is that part of what lies behind the kind of buffoonery of Hux throughout, I mean, he was pretty ridiculous in the first one, but like they really drive that home in this, especially in that first scene of, if he's the only one who comes across this scene of, Kylo's sort of taking over, it's not like he's this super savvy and strong leader himself who's really going to challenge him. And maybe that's part of the reason of kind of taking him down even some more pegs.
And Eric in the comments here, I mean, brings up a point that I've thought many times since seeing the film, seeing Last Jedi, is that like they don't establish the Emperor. Like they never even say Palpatine, right? Other than he's the Emperor. Okay, so he's the guy on the throne. Like
that's actually a lot more information than we know about Snoke. I mean, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine.
Snoke's the Supreme Leader.
But what does that mean? Like I know what an Emperor is. And actually, A New Hope is actually really smart in how it establishes the world building. It uses terms like Emperor and Senate that we're familiar with, and also, especially in the late 70s, most viewers would have known classical history. So Emperor, Senate, okay, think ancient Rome. This is like ancient Rome, where the Senate's not as powerful, and the Emperor is the real power. Also, the uniforms look like Nazi German officer uniforms, stormtroopers. So we think, okay, this is an empire. It's like Nazi Germany. It's evil. Okay, got it. With the First Order, we don't really have those cues as much. Like, I don't know what a supreme leader is. Is the First Order a cult? Is it an insurgent group? Is it like a rival foreign nation? And maybe that's just more world building than we're going to get out of the movies. But like, I feel like I don't know. Like, I don't even know if Snoke is supposed to be some deformed human or an alien. They're just like a lot of things that. Whereas, like, we knew the Emperor was human, we knew that he was the Emperor, like, and we knew based on his relationship with Vader that he was a pretty scary guy because Vader was a scary guy and he was scared of the Emperor. Whereas Ben Solo isn't that scary, so his being scared of Snoke doesn't establish him as much. So I don't know. I guess I'm sure we'll get like Snoke the novel sometime in the next year, but I still feel like the film could have done a bit more world building.
But are we ever going to get his robe at Hot Topic?
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
That was a real
question.
And his slippers.
Fabric there.
His slipper.
I was going to ask, does anyone remember what Snoke actually does call Kylo heir apparent? He says heir apparent to I don't know if he says heir apparent to the First Order or heir apparent to Darth Vader's.
I thought it was Lord Vader.
I thought it was Vader.
It's just heir apparent to Vader.
Mm-hmm.
I thought so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah.
Well, and there's a comment here, I guess, kind of along that line, from James Stevens saying Snoke is stoking the darkness in Kylo in order to bring about the counter light. So, is his role by intention, not so much about his own power as manipulating or bringing about power in the next generation or in other people? James finishes by saying, is he not dark enough to bring about what he wants? Is he sort of neutral evil and he's sort of provoking greater evil in other people?
Seems that way to me. We're given, like Dom said, we're given such little information about him. The only thing we see that he's really, really good at is manipulation. And I guess the Force. But that's all I think we know, right?
I agree. We needed more information. We needed just a little more information on Snoke.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear. I'm not like trying to say that like we don't want more information about Snoke. But I do think like I agree with you, Dom, that like there are a lot maybe more well-known parallels to the Emperor and the way things are set up in A New Hope, so that when we do finally see the Emperor later, we're kind of already well established as to like what his power is. But I don't know. I feel like I've always thought of the First Order, and I'm way behind on like the canonical novels and everything else ago. Like I wasn't able to read the Leia thing leading up to this, and any of the other stuff that might bring in stuff about Snoke. So there might even be other stuff there to talk about. But I don't know. I was thinking, like, I always thought of the First Order as like the Third Reich. Like it's like a similar type of name. Supreme Leader is just like I don't know that there's a big difference between that and Emperor. It's like the guy at the top, right? Like whatever structure there is underneath that, whether it's an empire or a kingdom or a cult or whatever you might have, he's the dude. He's, you know, the one that's the highest. And I guess, like, what do you need to know really more than that? I don't know. That's just the way that I took it. But I can understand why people like want more. So just.
Well, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think of this, but one thing, just very briefly, like on some Twitter comment, I don't know who said this, so I don't know who to credit, but that made the analogy of Nazis to neo-Nazis. Like, is this new First Order defined by its sort of nostalgia for an older empire? Not that it's necessarily, well, it's trying to recreate it, but it kind of by definition can't. And so it's more about their romanticizing of that and, you know, trying to bring out their ideologies. But I guess that's why in the end, the real villain isn't Snoke, it's Kylo. Like, Snoke is more just a figurehead for the old empire, whereas Kylo's the true sort of center of their ideology.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why I'm saying there's not enough world building, because Curtis and Kat just both offered two very different interpretations of the First Order, and that the Third Reich was a major world power with a lot of territory and a large industrial base. Neo-Nazis are fringe groups who, you know, are marginalized actors, sometimes engage in terrorist actions. Another possibility might be a group like ISIS, which controls some territory but isn't the nation state. Not that the movie has to get into all these little details, but like I don't have a sense of like whether the First Order controls planets. Like I don't you know, are they like neo-Nazis would be like a group that doesn't control territory?
Well, the opening words of the crawl is the First Order reigns.
Well, they do at the beginning of the Last Jedi, because Starkiller Base and they blew up the Republic, and after that they started controlling planets. But I don't have a sense of like whether they controlled a bunch of planets before, and that was a new development, or if they had this large. Also, building Starkiller Base, that's a huge undertaking, you know, and they must have had some resources for that.
And this is where maybe my extended universe reading comes into, because I always sort of equated it very much into kind of where the Thrawn trilogy begins, of like it's the remnants of the Empire pulling back together into some sort of organization, but it's like it's not. And I didn't mean to necessarily equate the First Order with the Third Reich. I just think that like they, like, the two names kind of evoke similar meanings to me, and there's also like the whole like New Order idea, and so like I don't think it's any one of those things. I don't necessarily think it's just a terrorist thing. I don't think it's maybe as well organized as like a Third Reich, but like maybe it falls somewhere in between on that spectrum. But I'm just saying, like, for me, that's the sort of idea that it evoked, and I'm sure that I'm coming to it with a lot of that baggage, just because I like the Thrawn stories and I like Thrawn. I'm glad they brought him back into the, but that's a whole other conversation we could have.
In terms of Snoke, though, so one thing, I think Emily or Kelly said something about like how the light and the dark balance, and one thing that what I took was that Snoke and Luke kind of balanced each other in the dark and the light, and then Kylo and Rey balanced each other in the dark and the light. So in this movie, both Snoke died, and then soon after Luke died. So you preserve the balance, and then in the next movie we'll see what happens with Rey and Kylo. But that was my understanding. Like, part of the reason Snoke was rising is because Luke, the light side was rising in Luke, so you needed a dark side counterbalance.
But is Luke actually like that counterbalance if he's disconnected from the Force this whole time?
So Is he disconnected? Can you be disconnected? Can you use the Force to disconnect yourself from the Force?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think there's evidence to him reawaking himself to the Force. Yeah, I don't know if the Force is what's between everything. How much can you disconnect? But I think he disconnects using it. I mean, just like it can awaken in someone. Could someone actively put it back to sleep? Maybe.
I mean, you know, Rey hasn't been using the Force all her life, or maybe she has in small ways, but not in the ways that she's doing now. You know, so maybe Luke's real failure is that he has sort of turned his back on this power inside himself, and this connection to other beings. I mean, that, he's alone on his little island, right? I mean, he's physically isolated, and so it seems like, that dialogue about him cutting himself off from the Force, signifies that he's spiritually isolated as well.
Here's the one reason I believe Luke is disconnected from the Force in the beginning of this movie. He does not know that Han is dead.
Mm-hmm.
If he'd been connected to the Force,
Yep.
even if he couldn't detect Han in the Force, he would have detected Leia, and he would have detected her anguish at Han's death, and he doesn't. So I think he really was disconnected in a pretty profound way.
Yeah, Kelly in the chat just there's another Kelly in the chat, and she just said the exact same thing, that not knowing about Han and not being aware that Leia is trying to find him are the kind of big pieces of evidence against that.
Yep.
Yeah, because the connection with Leia is isn't it the very first thing that hits him when he connects? He says Leia, and Leia wakes up, and it's so dark, wakes her up, and she says Luke.
But I don't know, because I don't think you like the Force isn't just like a telephone, like it's not like pulling up your text from like all your friends and like seeing like whatever, or social media. Like, I don't know that just because like Han died that Luke would have necessarily detected that. Would he have detected it in Leia? Like, probably there's a stronger case for that. But like Vader, when he first encounters in A New Hope, like Obi-Wan comes to the Death Star and it's like, oh, it's a presence I haven't felt in years. And it's like, well, can you backtrack that and say, well, through the Force, he should have been able to feel that he was on Tatooine the whole time. And like, I don't know that just because somebody dies or someone, like that there's that level of sort of granularity or I don't know what the right word is, but ability to sort of the sensitivity, I guess, in the Force to be able to feel just sort of any particular death like that. That's just my thought. So I don't know. Like so this brings up like another aspect of the movie that some people talk about is the idea of, are we introducing new Force powers and new concepts of what the Force is, and all of that. And I do have a slide on that. Because as Luke said, the Force does not belong to the Jedi. And as I've added, or the film only fans. There are things that happen with the Force that, yes, they didn't happen in any previous film, but that doesn't mean that there's not precedence for them and other stuff. So I've pulled up a few things that we talk about here. One of them is very clearly in reference to what I've been taken to calling Super Leia. But then a few other things as well. And so I'll just open it up. We can talk about these ones. We can talk about other things or keep talking about Luke and the Force and can he cut himself off? But just wanted to kind of transition into that thought too. Kind of similar. This is like the opposite side of the technology science coin, right? Like, what does the magic of the Force allow? And can you really say it can? Are there limitations at all? And like, is anything, within the realm of possibility or not?
So actually,
go ahead, Dom.
So this slide, this actually connects to Curtis's last point as well, in that if you've ever played the Knights of the Old Republic 2 video game, which is excellent, by the way, it's part of the old expanded universe, so it's no longer canon. you see a lot of new Force powers. And one of the things that happens is the main character is this female Jedi who's cut off from the Force, which is, one of the reasons why I believe it's Luke, it was possible for Luke to be cut off from the Force, because I've seen it before. It also brings up the larger point for why these new Force powers didn't disturb me. Because if you've seen this stuff in the expanded universe or the old video games or even the newer books and the canon of the cartoons, like they go into a lot of stuff that isn't never addressed in the movie. So I guess I've been acclimatized to it a bit more than maybe some other fans were.
And I do want to point out that these are all canonical references here, but yeah, like if you start pulling in Legends and EU stuff, I mean, like what are those creatures that like repel the Force in the Thrawn books? Like there's yeah, so like there's a lot of other stuff that like goes even way beyond maybe some of the things that people are complaining about.
And Luke does Force projections in the Dark Empire comics, just like he did in this movie. So yeah.
Well, I just wanted to throw out the rhetorical question. Like, I know there are issues of canon and there are issues of consistency and not letting the magic get too powerful to sort of, remove all of the limitations on the story and everything. But just from like a knee-jerk reaction point of view, I'm not sure why in a continuing story where you're getting new installments of something that's ongoing and expanding and introducing new ideas, that to some people, the introduction of new things, new abilities or concepts seems inherently problematic. It seems to me like that would be largely the point of having an ongoing story, is to not just play with the tools that you already have, but to occasionally add and introduce some new ones.
That's crazy talk, Kat. Crazy talk.
Kelly in the chat also brings up a reference that I missed of in Rebels, Kanan being pushed out an airlock by Maul and surviving. So talking about Jedi in space, which is not a parallel to pigs in space at all. I did not think of that one bit when I was doing that.
For me, and it's not so much the new or slightly different Force powers that we're seeing, and I don't know any of, like I read the first couple Thrawn books and like a couple of years ago, but beyond that, none of the actually some of the books, recent books and stuff like that, but nothing like Clone Wars and all that sort of stuff. So all of this is new to me, and I didn't know that there's examples of this sort of stuff before, but it makes a lot of sense to me. For me, it's the execution in this movie. Leia existing in space is a little hard to swallow, but again, I'll swallow it. It's fine. It's Star Wars. It's magic. Fine. But I just, this is the first time we see Leia doing the Force. This is the first time we see Leia beyond slight Force sensitivity. This is her action on the Force, and this is the very first time we see it, and that is hard for me to believe. And it's hard for me to believe Rey. She starts off telling Luke, "Oh, the Force is you can control people and you can lift rocks," and then Luke has given her very little instruction, and then the end of the movie is her, "Oh, it's lifting rocks." For me, it's the execution. It's I can all of this is believable to me, but the ease of which these characters are using these extremely powerful tools that they haven't quite learned to use is a little strange.
I didn't mind Leia using the Force to get herself back to the ship, partly because I thought I didn't see this as the first time we've seen Leia use the Force. All of her connections with Luke were always tapping into the Force on her part, and I also thought that this was a nice, I know maybe a stretch, but I thought it was a nice callback to the way she used the Force in Empire to locate Luke, when he's hanging there with one hand, and that's pretty overt. She tells them where to fly the ship to pick him up. So I didn't see that as the very first time. Obviously, it's much more powerful, but yeah. So it really didn't bother me. I was kind of more of the opinion of hey, Leia's using the Force. It's about darn time,
Well, and it may be the first time we see her take direct action, but this is 30 years later, right? I mean, do you fill in the blank of things might have changed in the last 30 years? There's been some practice. And maybe, maybe people would appreciate that having been addressed a little sooner before we see her do it, but I don't know that that's unbelievable necessarily.
I didn't think it
So
was. Oh, I was gonna say like the 30-year gap to me didn't escape me, but I think it's really strange for the audience to see that be her first. And she has this incredible. I know the Force isn't a weapon, but they have to get Luke back because of his Force, his powerful use of the Force. If Leia's got that, how is she using it? Are we just if she's been learning and training and all this sort of stuff, has she been using it to the Resistance? To help the Resistance in any way, or is it just? I don't know. For me, like there was more questions that I wanted answered.
So my own headcanon for some of that, and feel free to adopt it or reject it as you like. But so I think one of the things. So I'm severely behind, as I've mentioned, in all my like canonical book reading. But one of the books I have read and really enjoyed is Bloodline, which focuses on Leia's New Republic political stuff. And you and I have to have a conversation about that book at some point. But because I'd love to hear like a lot of your thoughts on it. But I believe, if I remember correctly, like a lot of that in there was that she was sort of doing at one point some training with Luke and getting more acclimated to the Force, but like there was a lot of other stuff taking up her time too. So I don't think we're ever gonna like she never gets to the point where like she's full on Jedi, she's done all this, but she has had some training. But yeah, like I mean, if you don't know that, if you haven't read that, like maybe it's a little jarring. I do think like in those moments, like so you get like the close up of like her and then Ren and then like the other TIE fighters and they shoot and it's like my own headcanon there is like she understands what's coming. Maybe she has like a slight into the future like vision of what's about to happen and like uses that to like do a sort of like deep Jedi calm, like Jedi not Jedi breathing, but like what's like a Jedi hibernation sleep mode type of thing where when she gets like that's all precedent. Like Don was saying, like that sort of stuff happens in the extended universe. People survive being out in space and that kind of thing. Like maybe it's just a matter of that acclimation. Like yeah, like if you've only ever seen the movies and or have mostly only seen the movies, maybe that's jarring because you're just not used to that type of thing being possible. And I think it would speak to Leia's strength and sort of more instinctual use of the Force with like a little bit of training, which I feel like is where Rey also kind of is at this point. Like Rey maybe has even had a little more training now after her 3 lessons with Luke than Leia sort of does, but like there's a raw power there, and that raw power is talked about both in terms of Kylo and Rey a lot. But like I think we're also sort of meant to see that Leia has that too, not just from this movie, but also from previous instances, like being able to have that connection, which is only audio, but is sort of the precursor to Force time, that we have now, right? It's like the pre-smartphone version of phones, right? Like it's what Leia was able to do just sort of naturally without any kind of training before, and now having a little bit of training, and maybe she's been meditating, practicing for the last 30 years, she can at least do that much to, in an emergency, save herself for a few seconds in space. That's my headcanon. Reject it or alter it as you desire. But
well, it might also be, as you're talking, Curtis, I'm remembering in the Leia novel, she actually uses the Force a couple times. She's doing some target practice with her little boyfriend dude, and she's like really good, at hitting targets, and he's like, whoa, and then later I think she even like uses the Force pretty overtly to save him from some precarious situation. It's been a while since I've read it.
I haven't
yeah,
read the Leia novel, but yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I haven't read the Leia novel, but Kelly in the chat brings up the Aftermath trilogy, where there are some snippets as well as Leia. And I might be confusing the two even. It's been a while since I read the Aftermath. I don't even know if I've read the third one, actually. But so there is at least some precedence in canon novels and stories of Leia using the Force. So, whether that satisfies you as a movie viewer and whatever, like I can get why people might be like, oh, why can she do that? But I'm also personally not that disturbed by it.
Well, I think there's also the issue that Kelly was bringing up, which is that there's this 30-year gap. We just don't know we don't know much about that 30-year gap for all the characters. Like, we don't know what happened to Han exactly and why he became the deadbeat dad. We don't know why the New Republic failed. If you don't read Bloodlines, which you should, it's probably the most essential book in the new Star Wars canon. You don't know why Leia is no longer in politics. And I think there's just kind of a point where, like, you accept that or you don't. Like, there's just stuff we're used in Star Wars to seeing the most important moments of these characters' lives. Like in the prequels, you saw pretty much like the highlights of Anakin's fall to the dark side, and so you just kind of accept that or you don't. The only time when Force powers for me, though, really are break the story is when they're inconsistently used, and more of a Clone Wars issue. But like sometimes you'll see characters who are usually able to levitate many things at a time, and then just conveniently struggle to lift two people who are about to fall off the side of a cliff. They only have enough power to lift one person, and the other person dies. It's like, well, we've seen that character lift things before, like lift many other people before. Like, why the other guy have to die? So it's more, for me, it's more of an issue of consistency than new powers.
Well, speaking of canon and raw Force power and consistency, one thing that has been curiously absent from the sequel movies is midichlorians, and I think they've done a great job of killing that horror and without explicitly doing so. And I think Rey is a great example of how, the fact that her parents are nobodies and she's a nobody, but she's really powerful. And there's been all of this, speculation of, oh, is she related to somebody so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And I think probably one of my favorite things about the sequels is how they've built that up and then totally stomped on it.
Well, and Anakin was a nobody too. So it's not like we're only going back one generation to like see, like, it's not like the Skywalkers have become this dynasty. I mean, I guess it remains to see what Kylo Ren does, but like, it's not like it's that far back that you have to go to find like another strong person in the Force who was a nobody. And as far as midichlorians go, does anybody ever tell Luke about midichlorian? Like, I wonder if that's like a deliberate decision. I mean, obviously this is retconning, but like, is that like a deliberate decision by Obi-Wan to just be like, yeah, I'm not going to even bring up the whole midichlorian test thing to Luke. That was dumb. We relied on it way too much, and look what happened. Like you could see a canonical argument. Oh, is it?
It's in one of those books in the Jedi Temple that Luke wanted to burn.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
But he didn't read them, right?
No, he didn't read them.
He didn't read them.
Well, I always wondered if anybody ever explained to Luke that the Jedi were a celibate order. Like, did that never get passed on? Did he just kind of assume that? Did he,
People generally forget that part of
not in the extended universe, they didn't.
I'm pretty sure in the canon novels that comes up. I'm trying to think of. Don't quote me on this. I think it might be in the Luke Skywalker novel written by Kevin Hearns, where that comes up. But again, my memories are fuzzy.
Is that new canon or?
Yeah, it's a new canon. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
I'm pretty sure it is a known thing that Jedi are celibate.
Okay.
So, moving on from like Force powers, unless there's any other particular things you want to talk about there, I think we've already covered like probably quite a bit of this kind of thing, but this was just sort of the last thing of maybe the humor aspect is the one thing we didn't cover quite as much, or did we? I don't even remember at this point. What did we talk about 2 hours ago? But like, so for me personally, like, I like the humor for the most part. But I think, like, again, coming out of like my first viewing, and again, this might have been a conversation with you, Dom, about like just saying like there was maybe just like one too many gags. Like there was just like, I don't know, like the stuff with Poe I'm fine with at the beginning, and like the you know, a lot of it you know, was fine. The porgs were fine. Everything's fine. How are you doing? But I think the one thing that after 3 viewings I kind of came away with, like the one gag, or maybe the couple of gags that I really didn't like, was with the, I don't know what to call it, like the caretaker nuns on Octo. And and the reason I say that is because I feel like it's a very jarring dissonance with the message that Rose brings up on Canto Bight about look behind the scenes and look at like the help, so to speak. Like look at the people who are doing the work. And I feel like it's very disrespectful the way they treat these nun caretaker, like, you know, oh, we're, you know, carrying this thing up this huge hill to like take care of Luke and Rey, and like it's sort of like tossed away as like a gag that like Rey chops off a rock with her lightsaber and like knocks the cart out of the hand and stuff. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into that or whatever, but I do feel like there was just 1 or 2 gags on the whole, and like if I were to pick ones that had to be taken out, like those would have been it. In which case, do you even need those characters? Which brings up a whole other question. But
that's a really fair point, and I think like maybe there should have been a scene where Rey like apologizes or turns out, you know, tries to help those aliens, which are, I think they're Lyannas or something. I think their name. There was a scene that was deleted, and this is mentioned in the Art of the Last Jedi book. Remember in the movie, Luke says he's going to teach Rey 3 lessons, but we only get 2. So the 3rd lesson is actually going to maybe touch upon that a bit, where Luke was going to say something like, "Oh, there's a fire in their village. You have to go save them," and Rey's running to try to save them, and then it turns out they're having a big bonfire party, and Luke has a chuckle over it, and it's supposed to be a lesson about. I think it's supposed to be a lesson in how, like, you're not supposed to assume that everybody needs you to save them all the time or something. And it's kind of also a bit of a joke on her, and she gets upset about it. But so I wonder if there was supposed to be a moment though there where Rey is supposed to connect a bit more with those aliens, and you know, to have more of a personal relationship with them rather than just treating them as a gag. But you know, but I think that's definitely a fair point about how it kind of seems at odds with the Rose message in the movie.
Yeah, for me, I thought the same thing, especially because I think this movie is really heavy on the message of one of the biggest things is listening to creatures and listening to animals and listening to outsiders, other people from yourself. And so the fact that the caretakers were this sort of gag, and I mean, I think, and it goes beyond this film too, is, you know, you listen to the people of the planet that you're on. You listen to the natives. I think, and beyond that, the one thing I would just take out entirely from both films is Maz. I just thought that was just everything with her. That's her name, right? Maz.
Yeah, Maz Kanata.
I thought it was just, yeah. I just thought it was clumsy and awkward and just not funny at all, and didn't even make sense that she would be on a phone call and also like dealing with this sort of in the middle of a fight, and
yeah,
I don't know. It's supposed to be.
Yeah, and her castle just got blown up like 5 minutes ago.
Why is she answering the phone call?
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, and she's in the middle of this other. Yeah, you're right. That was like, you know, I think somebody on one of the Rebel Force Radio podcasts said, you know, if you have a cool character but nothing for the cool character to do, don't put her in the scene.
Yeah,
it's gonna make your character less cool.
Exactly, and I thought it was really neat. It was like this moment of Poe being like, "Maz, is there any way we can do this without your help?" Like, and she being like, no, this is the only way, was very like, no, guys, they're gonna have to go to Canto Bight. Like, to the audience, it just was like,
Yeah.
very.
Even more
Well,
so, and this kind of pissed me off. If you need somebody from the sleazy underworld on a casino planet, who do you call? You call Lando Calrissian. Why wasn't he in this movie?
I
Ryan
know.
Johnson said several times there's no place for Lando in the story, and they go to a casino planet. How that should have been Lando on the phone call. Just have a short cameo with Billy D. Williams
Really?
and hey Lando, we need a code breaker. Oh yeah, I go to this casino planet all the time. You can find somebody there.
Oh my gosh.
That would
And
have
he
made
was
more
so,
sense than Maz Kanata.
or how about I give you his phone number and you can just call him?
Yeah. Or that too.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with Maz is like, how does she and Poe know each other? Like,
Well,
like,
I don't know.
like, I mean, Finn is more a believable connection there.
and maybe
Well,
that's, I mean,
didn't really like Finn though.
There was a
Yeah.
deleted scene, and I think this is in the novelization, where Maz Kanata was actually supposed to have gone back to Resistance base briefly with Leia and the rest of them,
Okay.
and then left. So, in theory, they could have met, but yeah, it's still very forced. Lando would have been a much better option.
now, did you read, is the novelization, I mean, that's not out until
Oh,
March.
sorry, I meant the Force Awakens novelization.
Oh, The Force Awakens. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I choked my way through that, but I was,
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan
better
of
on the
Valentine
audiobook.
Foster's writing,
No.
but anyway.
Better on audiobook.
Not bad. I read it.
Okay. Well, I mean,
that Poe meets Rey in that book, and it turns out that Poe doesn't meet Rey until the end of this movie. So I don't know if that book is even canon anymore.
I don't think the novelizations are canon though.
Well, yeah, they are.
They were supposed to be, unless they conflict with the movies, in which case they aren't. And obviously Poe meeting Rey didn't happen in The Force Awakens. So
That's so backward.
and really,
You be canon, but if you say something we don't like, then you're not.
Kind of,
But
yeah.
that's how it was with the EU. Like it was
Yeah.
like, and they had like tiers of canonicity
Yeah.
and like all of it. Like, so anyway, like we don't need to go down that road. I mean, so we're coming up on 11 o'clock, at least for those of us in the East. Any like final things that like, I don't want to cut it short, and we're not because it's been a while, but any other things that like, at least big points, thoughts that we haven't covered yet? I mean, I'm sure all of us could spend a lot of time sitting around talking about this, but anything major that someone really wanted to bring up that we didn't cover?
Well, I'll give a parting prediction. I predict that following the similarities between Kylo Ren and Severus Snape's characters that I enjoyed observing in The Force Awakens, that we're going to end with some kind of a redemptive, sacrificial, romantic, love-based Kylo Ren demise because he has sort of fallen for Rey, and in true Severus Snape and Lily Evans Potter fashion, he's going to meet his end to save Rey. So there's my prediction right there.
Oh yeah, I think we're gonna see a lot more love. Of course, that's what Rose tells Finn, right? Is we're gonna win by saving what we love, not fighting what we hate. One major thing, and I touched on this a little bit, but I started writing this as like a blog post, but then just never did because I don't have the novelization and I can't have quotes, and that kills me. Is I think that this film pays a lot of attention to animals in a really unique way, and a lot of attention to natural environment versus man-built or military order and that sort of things. It's one of the biggest messages that we see from the porgs and Chewie eating a porg and then deciding not to eat a porg. Of course, I don't eat animals, so I'm very biased, but I think yeah, exactly, yeah. Listening to animals, listening to porgs, seeing where green milk comes from, where blue milk comes from. It's this moment of wonder that Rey looks at that animal and then in disgust, and then kind of like, oh, I shouldn't be looking at this very intimate use of animal. listening to the crystal foxes, whatever their actual name is, and all this sort of the natural environment of where Luke and Rey are versus where Kylo is. So I think that's a really, and of course the freedom of the characters, the creatures on Canto Bight. It's listening to them and freeing them, and paying attention to people who don't have a voice is an extremely important message in this film. And I think that we'll see more of that. I hope we see more of that.
So my prediction slash fantasy for episode 9 is actually related to like my big question about the sequel trilogy, which is why do we have a sequel trilogy? Yes, I know Disney bought Lucasfilm. I know the external context, but in terms of the story, like why Return of the Jedi seemed like a pretty clear victory for the Rebels, and the sequel trilogy overturns that. And it's not clear to me yet in the story why that happened, why that needed to be the case, why we need to see this at all. And I think The Last Jedi provided potentially a really interesting answer, which is that the victory in Return of the Jedi was superficial. It was simply killing the head of the snake. It was killing destroying the old political institutions, possibly setting up a new republic, but not really leading a societal transformation. People's lives didn't get better. You still have slavery on Canto Bight. You still have poverty. You still have war profiteering. You still have instability. And I think it'd be really interesting if somehow, and I know, especially J.J. Abrams directing, I know there's not going to be like a lot of world building and discussion of politics, and there shouldn't be, but it'd be really interesting if they conveyed that this time, if the good guys win, as they probably will, the good guys win in these movies, this time it leads to something bigger and deeper and longer lasting, and people's lives get better. And maybe that even means like your average person gets involved in the rebellion. This is no longer a contest between elites, like the force wielding elites. Maybe it's like Stable Boy and Canto Bight joins the fight, or like your random person on your random planet joins the fight, and they get rid of slavery. Like so, like maybe because it's a deeper societal transformation, that's why the sequel trilogy needed to exist, because we needed to, and this needed to be a real longer lasting victory. So if they can do something like that, I think that would be really interesting. I don't know how you pull that off in one movie. Good luck, J.J. Abrams, but that I think that would really make this whole 9-episode story resonate.
I think they've definitely laid the groundwork for that, though I think you're really spot on, because I think that this movie, another thing that it does is it totally dismantles the idea of legends and the hero, and instead of big heroic moments, we're pointed to smaller actions and choices that are based off of love or hope, or not these grand heroic gestures. Of course, there's plenty of those as well, but I think it's starting to move in that direction and go away from like, big elites to the ordinary person and their involvement on a very personal level with the people they interact with every day.
Well, and I think Rose seems like the articulation of that concept, both in her background as a character, but also the way that she expresses those themes that Kelly just said too. I don't have a prediction per se. I have a question, which is, it seems to me like, the first, Force Awakens was very much built around Han as the most, prominent of the old characters returning. This one obviously spent a lot of time with Luke. It seems to me that the next movie was supposed to be the Leia movie. My question is how they do that without Leia, without just recreating her digitally, which please God,
they're
don't
not
let
going
them
to.
do it.
They've already said they won't.
They have to find another way. So that's kind of my prediction / question, is that they'll still at least attempt to make it about her, but without Carrie Fisher.
Well, based on that, my prediction is that they're going to start with Leia's funeral. Like that's going to be the opening. Leia's gone and the resistance is flailing, and who's going to step into leadership? I mean, they're clearly priming Poe for that, right? But that's my prediction for where they start anyway. Yeah. Dave, any final thoughts?
I'm going to go superficial. I'm looking forward to awesome lightsaber duels and lots of spaceship battles.
That'll probably happen.
Guaranteed.
With a big explosion at the end.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone in our audience, for joining us tonight. I saw we lost a couple people, but we still got 25 strong. So looks like we're growing our second movie club panel in. And thank you all for joining. If you've signed up, which you all clearly have, you'll get reminders about our next ones, and we'll be posting the full schedule soon. Again, we have in February, we have our Hitchhiker's Guide discussion, February 22nd, right? I have to go back and look at my slide here again to make sure I'm getting that right. And then after that, A Wrinkle in Time. So we'll see everyone then. Back next week at around this time, Corey will be talking about the Hitchhiker's Guide for his final class on that. And we'll see you all then. And thank you again to all our panelists for joining. And I'm sure the conversation will continue in blog posts and Twitter and all of the usual places. So look forward to seeing that. Thank you. And
Thank you.
May the force be with you.
And also with you.
Also with you.
Your spirit.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.